Thank you, Rachel. Hi, everyone. I'm Leah Hamilton. I'm an associate professor of social work at Appalachian State University. So I have been experimenting with MTurk for several years um, for online surveys. And because I am a social work faculty, I study welfare policy, guaranteed income, and I've been using MTurk as a way to do several things, gauge things like public attitudes about universal basic income. This particular study, I wanted to reach public assistance recipients. I wanted to get feedback from public assistance recipients at step assisted needy families, supplemental nutrition assistance program, that's some people know it as food stamps, about their get feedback about their experiences. So I wanted to see if MTurk would be a good avenue for that. So the problem and solution that really brought up this study was that we really need more research from the perspective of welfare participants, but there's a lot of confidentiality and ethical considerations in recruiting those folks, right? I can't like partner with a local agency and say, hey, can I have the names of your recipients? Confidentiality is a big issue for this populations, and even things like, this is a hard to reach population. There's some work out there about using MTurk for hard to reach populations, people who may change their phone numbers more frequently or may not have reliable phone numbers, may not have access to computers, may not have smartphones, that sort of thing. So and so this study again is looking at whether or not MTurk would be a platform for social science as a low cost, low barrier way to reach participants, especially hard to reach populations. The first step in figuring that out is whether or not MTurk respondents were demographically similar to the general population of those receiving public benefits. And then as sort of like a secondary check on that validity, whether or not the experiences that they report were similar to were thematically congruent with the existing welfare policy research. I deployed the survey in 2019 to US-based adult MTurk workers. The criteria were that they were 18 plus in the US and self-identified as having ever received SNAP, TANF, SSI, or unemployment. We told respondents that it would take 10 to 20 minutes. They spent an average of 13 minutes taking the survey. We reimbursed folks $2 for taking the survey. And then after after data cleaning, I was trying to get 50 participants. 2 participants said they had one of those programs to get into the survey, but then in the survey, they self-disclosed as having never received one of those. So we had to clean out 2 of those. So that's important for future information. Real quick. This was not a super sophisticated analysis with 48 participants. So quantitative data was analyzed with descriptive statistics. I also had open-ended questions. I used qualitative content analysis. I usually use a phenomenological method in qualitative analysis, which means highlighting significant statements, and then analyzing emergent themes. And then I used in vivo thematic analysis. So the first step, of course, to figuring out if this is a reasonable entry point is to compare the MTurk sample with national surveys of folks who receive public assistance. So on the left is the MTurk sample demographics that I accessed, and on the right is the National Consumer Expenditure Survey of folks who receive public assistance. So you'll see from here that the MTurk sample was much less female, roughly equivalent population of white respondents, about 6% more white respondents in the MTurk sample. We had a slightly more educated sample, that about 20% of national samples of welfare recipients have less than a high school diploma. We had 0% here. We had much higher rates of some college or associate's degree, much higher rates of having a bachelor's degree. When I asked folks what they had received, SNAP was the most common program respondents, with 22% reporting that they had only ever received SNAP, and that's more or less consistent with national data that SNAP is by far the most common. And SNAP, again, for those who are not immersed in this literature, is basically food stamps. That's pretty common that SNAP is the most widely received program in the U.S. So we looked then at some of the qualitative responses to see if those were sort of congruent with the existent welfare research body. So some people said things like, when we asked people, what was your experiences with these programs? Assistance helped them cover basic necessities. It gave some people the room and ability to focus on getting a job. Some people, or especially people who received SNAP, experienced improved nutrition. Some people talked about it giving them a little bit of breathing room to pursue, to like finish higher ed, improving their well-being and reducing stress. About a third of people said they have no complaints. They just said we appreciated the help, no complaints. Other people did report bureaucratic hurdles. Some people said that the amount was insufficient to cover basic needs. And then some people touched on work, income, and asset disincentives, so that, and again, if you're not immersed in the literature, there's a growing body of literature that says that the very, very low income limits and asset limits that we put on people in welfare makes it difficult to grow their income, grow their assets, and become financially independent in the long run. So those themes came out here and also are existent in the current literature. Just real quickly, here's an example quote: "The amount given for both food and cash assistance were vital. Both were needed because not having resources with which to pay for necessities, such as transportation, would have been extremely difficult." So without going too deep into the welfare literature, I think this is fairly consistent. People, again, talked about it covered my basic needs, but there's still a gap between covering basic needs and giving people the ability to really get on their feet, grow their income, grow their assets, that sort of thing. And I was curious about are different people in different programs experiencing different burdens. So I looked at those, that coding broken down by people by what type of assistance they received. So on the far left column, those are people who only received SNAP, food stamps. The middle column is folks who'd received TANF, that's cash assistance plus SNAP. Nobody had received cash assistance alone. And then the far right column is people who had only received unemployment insurance. So it looks like people who had only received food stamps were much more likely to have no complaints, be generally happy with the program. People who were in unemployment insurance were most likely to complain about disincentives for independence. So we see some of those things coming out in the literature, that unemployment, the way our unemployment system is structured, makes it difficult to have the breathing space to get a good job, because they feel pressured into just taking the first job that comes along, even if it has no benefits, poor wages, those sorts of things. The unemployment insurance folks were also the most likely to complain about bureaucratic hurdles. And then the folks who received TANF and SNAP were the most likely to report that the amount was just insufficient to really cover their needs. Again, just to really quickly summarize that, people were grateful for the additional assistance, but few people really described it as a means to get, I'm going to use a colloquialism, pull themselves up by their bootstraps, set themselves up for their financial futures. Only a minority really described the experience as supporting finding more stable employment or seeking higher ed. There's a lot of literature that says that the way our programs are structured actually creates barriers to doing those things. SNAP only participants had higher levels of satisfaction. Again, so there are parallels to existing research. There's a lot of research around frustration with bureaucratic hurdles, lengthy application processes, ineffective job training programs, disincentives to work or build assets. There's some really interesting literature out there that from qualitative interviews with welfare caseworkers that these hurdles may be intentional, as they can effectively deter otherwise eligible applicants and save the state money. That's sort of just interesting aside. So this is a really preliminary analysis of the use of MTurk. Obviously, we had big demographic differences with the national population of welfare recipients. So I think but we did have a lot of thematic parallels. So I think probably to use this in the future, my biggest recommendation would be to use quota tools within the MTurk platform. Or the other, Amazon platforms that they're developing to make sure you match the demographic and of national assistance receiving households. But there is some real strengths, I think, that MTurk brings for this. So a lot of the research that's out there with public assistance recipients is really site dependent. That means like maybe a university researcher partnered with their local assistance office to talk to those participants. But because a lot of the welfare programs in the US are devolved to state and local power, the programs can be really different in every county and every state. So it's really difficult to make sort of like nationally generalizable conclusions. So I think that's a strength of MTurk, is that you can talk to people across the country and get a better picture of kind of what's happening across the nation with welfare recipients. And so I think there's a lot of promise here for MTurk, looking at national currents again for welfare recipients. And that is it. I'll stop there.
How did you recruit this particular group? Did you what was the process of identifying them as a welfare recipient?
Yeah, so it was all self-identified. So I'm pretty sure it was like there was a filter language at the beginning of Qualtrics that said, are you 18? Have you ever been a recipient of one of these 4 programs, proceed yes or no. And I think that I set up language in the MTurk platform that said, do not click through if you are not 18, a recipient of, blah, 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 blah. So there probably needs to be some work on how to better create those filters. It worked pretty well as self-identified. Only had about 2 people squeak through who didn't match that criteria. Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks for having me. Happy to answer questions by email or chat.
Thank you. And next we have Spencer Baker.
I'm Spencer Baker. I'm really happy to be talking to you guys today. I love methods. I love online research, and I get to bring online research into an area of research that only a few people care about, but I find absolutely fascinating. So talking about grassroots sampling of niche online religious communities. I'm not a professor. I'm not a kind of market researcher. I would love to be either of those things. So if anyone wants to hire me, please do after you see the presentation. I'm a graduate student. So this is my 2nd year as a graduate student in the psychology of religion. And this was a really good project that me and some of the other people in my lab did to kind of get in touch with samples who traditionally religion researchers have had some trouble reaching. So quick roadmap for how the presentation is going to go. You've seen a lot of numbers and graphs today. It's going to be a little bit more conceptual. This project was a little bit more exploratory, so I want to kind of work through some of that. First, talk about the question that our lab was interested in asking, and talk about some of the challenges with sampling, figuring out exactly what kind of sample we wanted and how to get to them, which is a little trickier than we originally thought it was going to be. And then lessons and applications from it. These are lessons and applications that hopefully everyone can use a little bit, but it is kind of contextual to our situation. And by our situation, I mean, you might be able to tell I'm in a closet. I share like an office with 3 other grad students. We don't have a lot of funding, and we don't have access to a lot of rich international samples of people that we wish we had. So sometimes in this kind of situation with this kind of exploratory research, we have to get a little bit creative. And I think it actually paid out really well in terms of the data quality that we ended up with, but I'll get into that a little bit later. So first, starting out, our research question. So this is what I wish to spend the whole presentation on. There's a relatively new theory, researcher Jer Clifton at University of Pennsylvania in social psychology about primal world beliefs, people's fundamental beliefs about the world. Like I said, 2 or 3 years old, maybe. So there is very little established research on this theory, but it matches very well. It seems to match up perfectly with a lot of the things that we already study. Beliefs and how they influence people's behavior, beliefs in mental health, beliefs and how they kind of people navigate the world and think about it. In psychology of religion, that's all we think about anyway. So this was a perfect opportunity for our lab to get involved and explore these kind of beliefs. And we wanted to ask specifically how are religious, spiritual, and secular beliefs related to primal beliefs about the world. So this is what we wanted to do, got in touch with Jer, and he said, absolutely, investigate that on your own and get back to me. So that was kind of where we were about this time last semester in the spring, figuring out how we wanted to collect data to kind of initially explore primal world beliefs and how they're related to religious and spiritual beliefs. We decided on a very particular way of getting across. Like when you have such a new theory and there's nothing out there. There is no theory about the relationship between primal world beliefs and religion because no one has had the opportunity to do it before. Obviously, in the social sciences, we have this very strong confirmatory hypothesis testing framework, which is very good. I'm very much in favor of that. But it works best when you can bring existing theory to bear on empirical questions and confirm whatever hypothesis you're working with. And there are no hypotheses in this space. So this is kind of what we're working with here is how do you find a sample to test theories that you don't have yet. We took a page out of, I guess, a literal book. John Tukey wrote a book called Exploratory Data Analysis in 1977, and it's still very, very relevant, where he lays out kind of an approach to using data to form theories in social psychology. Exploration, it's very similar to those of you that are familiar with qualitative methods, very similar to a grounded theory approach, or very similar to p-hacking in traditional quantitative approaches, but with the understanding that you generate theories and then you take them in a kind of multi-phase project, use the theories you generate from one data set and test them rigorously in a confirmatory fashion in future data sets. So that's how our project is structured. We've been through the initial exploratory data set, which is what I'm presenting to you right now. And then we'll be digging into kind of the multi-phase as the semester goes on. But specifically, obviously, I'm not here to talk about the theory as much as I want to. It's about the methods we use to get people that really were suited for this kind of analysis. So the situation we're in is there's kind of a problem with the data sets we generally bring to bear on this. Obviously, you're all familiar with the only people that psychology recruits for its studies are undergraduate psychology majors. And we had some significant questions about whether or the right sample to use for this approach. First, the age sample is really restricted. It's particularly problematic in religion research because it's been shown in other studies there's some instability in people's religious beliefs as they go through during that age, particularly people who are a little bit younger. So we needed to get a broader age sample. And also the undergraduate population that we have access to has little to no representation from Eastern religions. And we know this because our original sample, we gathered a pretty small sample at the end of the last semester, the spring semester, of undergraduate students. And I'll show you how that data looked in a second, just the breakdown by religion. And it was not what we needed for our research. We had little to no representation of any religious group that wasn't Christian, which is fine. You can test plenty of hypotheses with people who are just a member of Christian religious groups, but we wanted to get different kinds of people or different kinds of religious beliefs and spiritual traditions in our data. So this led us to our data analysis approach. So taking a grassroots sampling approach. So this is gathering a sample where we went to online religious communities and personally approached them, messaged them, talked to the people who ran the communities, the people in the communities, and directly gave our survey to them. This had a number of advantages, I think. We wanted people who were engaged with the material, who were willing to engage with the survey, not just on a shallow level, but on a level where because it really it's a topic where people had to think very deeply about their religious beliefs and their fundamental beliefs. So we wanted people who were motivated to take the survey, people who were enmeshed in religious communities, because there's a significant difference in the psychology of people who are enmeshed in religious communities and people who are kind of casually or nominally religious, and being able to, without having to resort to any kind of paid survey software, access populations we didn't have access to through an undergraduate sample. Obviously, a lot of labs do have access to that kind of funding. Any funding that we have on the graduate level is just going towards thesis projects right now. A lot of our time is going to other projects. And this method was really good. This really suited the exploratory nature of our data analysis. We made sure to engage respectfully and openly with the religious communities we were trying to sample from, making sure we abided by any of the rules of the communities, making sure we were talking clearly to the people, answering any questions that they had, taking into account their feedback on the survey to make sure that establish a little bit of rapport and trust with the people in the communities. What the specific communities looked like was a little different from spot to spot. There are communities on social media sites, closed Facebook groups, Reddit pages, message boards, things like that. We cut out a list of them specifically we're already familiar with, and then divvied them up among our graduate researchers in order to get our sample here. What this ended up looking like is, I'll just show you a couple of graphs, a couple of pie charts real quick, really easy. This was our student sample, the kind of religious breakdown of our student sample. I've done something that any religion researcher would just kill me if they saw, and condensed everyone into a category called all other religious groups. But this just shows how kind of homogeneous our sample was when we just kept it to the undergraduate students at UTC versus our online sample, which was a lot more evenly spread out. Obviously, you still get, it's difficult to get a really robust sample of people from other religious communities, but it's quite a bit more. We ended up with about 100 participants who identified with other religious traditions, including people who were Wiccan, Baha'i, a lot of spiritual, non-religious participants, Muslims, people who are not in the really traditional Western monotheistic religious tradition. And this was excellent for the kind of exploratory data analysis we were doing. Real quick, these are the takeaways. Everyone's questions and hypotheses are going to look different. But I think some of the things that we learned from this technique were to get creative, creative in a very specific way. Obviously, creativity and data analysis can lead to biased samples pulling from low quality data that isn't generalizable, but really matching and understanding that a good sample looks different depending on what your question is. So being able to be creative enough to find the people that you're interested in getting data from, and then trying to go target those communities in a really specific way. We really drew on the expertise of different people in our lab for data analysis. One of our lab members studies mystical experience and near-death experiences, and he was already plugged into a community of people who were a lot of people from Eastern religious traditions, and he was able to bring his kind of rapport with that community already and get a lot more engagement on the survey. And we found in these communities, another thing about the data quality is much better performance on attention checks and much higher data quality, fewer missing, like a lot less missing data in these groups than even the student sample that we had. So it really seemed, as far as at least superficial measures of data quality, this approach and using this kind of rapport with the communities worked really well. And it also had the advantage of being able to listen to these communities was really helpful because, as we said, it's a multi-phase process. We go in, we ask them some questions, and then we can listen to them and figure out which of the questions made sense and which of the questions really didn't make sense. We got some feedback from a Buddhist who took the survey, and we asked them questions about God. And they were talking about, well, I wanted to endorse some of these statements, kind of, but I don't believe in a God, but I believe in certain other things that might be comparable depending on how you ask the question. So really some of the idiosyncrasies of people's religious beliefs, we can take this initial phase and the initial feedback we get from this survey and take it into future stages of data analysis. So the way that we ask the questions gets better as we continue to ask them. And that's dependent on individual communities. That's why diversifying the sample was so useful in this process. Yeah, those are the main things: the creativity, matching to the sample that we wanted to match with, understanding the skills and strengths of the different people on our research team, and listening to the participants, is I think has set us up really well for the next stage of the process. And then real quick, I guess I will go ahead and open it up for questions.
Do you have a category for agnostics? And if so, approximately what percentage of the sample are they?
Yes, we actually had more than that. We had a category for agnostics, and we asked people questions endorsing basically agnostic beliefs about the world. I think it was about 9% of the total sample was agnostic. It was a breakdown between atheists and agnostics, and there were actually really significant differences in their beliefs in the sample. And we had atheist, agnostic, and just kind of religiously non-affiliated, and I don't really know, because the way that people express secular beliefs varies quite a bit between those kind of groups. So yeah, that's a good question.
How were you effective at getting these respondents to participate in your survey? Did you incentivize them in any way? Was there any kind of like, I don't know, some kind of lottery or something like that? And like how long was the survey? Was there any dropout? Did you try to measure in some way like how large this online group was, and like what percentage of that group actually like completed the survey? In other words, was it like would you say, most people were happy to participate, or would you say it was like a small percentage of people who participated?
I would say both of those actually. So of general methodology stuff, survey was about 25 to 30 minutes. There was no incentive to participate. There was at the beginning just a statement of like, this is totally up to you to participate, but we're genuinely interested in your foundational beliefs about the world. So basically we wanted to kind of screen for participants who were in it for intrinsic reasons. I would say a small percentage of the communities participated. Those that did had relatively good data quality. There was, I think, there was some drop off, but it was relatively small. Maybe as you go throughout we had to filter out maybe about 25% total. I have to go back and see the original numbers. It was lower than the number of people who dropped out from the student sample. So we were happy with that, but I don't know exactly what to compare it to compared to average numbers of survey dropout in those kind of research techniques.
So I guess like for people who want to try to recruit from these kinds of social groups, what would be your advice for what's effective? What did you find to be most useful in approaching people?
The main advice is join the communities before, like start looking at the communities or talking to someone in the communities before. It doesn't have to be a long time, but talk with someone before you post your survey. Make sure you understand the norms, the like basic foundational norms of what people talk about, who's on there. Is it a group that's friendly to research? Is it a group that's kind of closed for just the discussion of religious topics? Or is it a more general social group? That went a long way in how we worded these, not the survey itself, but how we like presented it to people, the rules we had to follow in posting those kind of surveys. And even better, if you get someone in the community to post, say like, hey, if it's like a moderator of a community, post the survey and says, hey, some researchers are interested in our beliefs. That kind of, if you get the gatekeepers of the community, that was really positive. And we saw kind of a relationship I think there were 2 communities that did that. And we got a lot of respondents from them specifically.
Great. All right, so today I'm going to be presenting a paper that's currently in press at Behavioral Research Methods, where we develop a tool for verifying participants' age online. Okay, so first, what does online participant fraud look like? We've heard a lot about it today. I'm going to just say a little bit more. So basically, fraud happens when people lie about their demographic characteristics in order to qualify for a study that they would otherwise not be eligible for, so that they can make more money. This is, one instance of fraud at least. And so in past research, participants have been found to misrepresent their sexual orientation, lie about their gender, lie about their age, claim to have pets or consumer products that they don't actually own, and generally just say or do anything necessary to gain access to studies that leave the door open to fraud. And specifically when it comes to age, normally when people lie about their age, what we're used to is people claiming to be younger than they actually are. But in online studies, older adults tend to be in short supply, and so they tend to be paid more. And this creates an incentive for young people to misrepresent themselves as being older. For example, there's one study by Westling et al. That found that a lot of participants in a survey about dietary fiber supplements were being dishonest. So they tended to claim to be over 50 when they had actually already provided a younger age in a previous survey. Imposters like these pose a really serious threat to the validity of research, not only because they're outside of the target population, but also because they tend to systematically skew the findings of studies. So, for example, in the study that I just mentioned, young imposters tended to express greater interest in fiber supplements compared to like actual real adults, older adults. Similarly, men who impersonate women tend to choose pink consumer products at a higher rate than women actually choose. And in these examples, the results are skewed towards overrepresenting the interests of the target groups, but the results can also be skewed the other way. So for example, in Siegel and Navarro's study, Democrats who posed as Republicans tend to report favorability towards Donald Trump. So to combat this kind of fraud, there are a few existing steps that researchers can take. These include separating demographic screeners from the actual study. So there's like a two-step process there. Using a platform's demographic targeting options, or building a panel of participants for repeated survey use. But even when researchers do all this, imposters can still slip through because these methods rely on participants' self-reports. And so someone might, realize what's happening and then create a profile where they consistently report being an older adult. And as long as they're being consistent, they're going to slip through. Also, researchers, like we just heard, can sometimes recruit participants from open sources like Reddit or Craigslist, or intercept people while they're playing videos or shopping online. And with this kind of recruitment, researchers lack even the most basic demographics that you would get through participant platforms. So the bottom line is that it would be really useful to have a tool to verify that people are actually who they say they are, and in this case, that they are the age that they claim to be. So in our paper, what we're doing is demonstrating a general approach to verifying age online, which is testing cultural knowledge. And basically what we expect is that older adults will know more about popular cultures from past decades compared to younger adults, which makes sense because they lived through these experiences. And we also expect younger adults to know more about older adults about more recent decades because younger adults tend to be more up to date on what's happening in popular culture. To develop our instrument, we fielded a pilot study on MTurk where we targeted a handful of younger people and a handful of older people. And we came up with a long list of multiple choice questions about culture, about songs or characters on TV shows. And then we also included some open-ended questions about national politics and news stories for exploratory purposes. And then at the beginning of the survey, this is kind of an important step, is people read a message telling them to please not use any outside resources. And if they don't know, it's better to select I don't know as an answer than it is to guess. And importantly, we told people like your compensation does not depend on how well you answer these questions. So we didn't want to really incentivize cheating in any way. And so these are some examples of the questions that we asked. And you can take a second to look at them. To get at the final list of questions, what we did was we relied on difference scores because we wanted to control for people's overall level of pop culture knowledge and not essentially penalize people for not knowing a lot about anything. So for each item in the pilot study, what we did is we subtracted the percentage of young people who got the question right from the percentage of old people who got it right, which gave us a different score. And so positive scores indicate questions where older people did better, and negative scores indicate questions where younger people did better. And as you can see here, some of these differences are really big. Like essentially some of the questions, the older cohort got all of the questions right, and the younger cohort got none of them. So there's pretty big effects, especially for a social science paper. And so then what we did was to select the final items for the questionnaire. We chose the 19 items that had the lowest and highest scores. So ones, that each group did relatively better on. And then when we ran the analyses, we realized that we could really cut it down to just the top 6 without compromising that much accuracy. So we report the results from the top 6 questions in the main paper and then the full 19 in the supplemental materials, but they're really not that different. Okay, so in study 1, we wanted to test the AVI's ability to discriminate between online participants of various ages. So AVI here stands for Age Verification Instrument. And what we did is recruited people into the study by age based on demographic targeting on MTurk and on prime panels in study 1A and 1B. And then we aim to have approximately equal numbers of participants in each age group. We showed participants the 19-item AVI and again told them to not look up the answers and just say, I don't know, if they didn't know. We also, just to validate that people weren't lying about their age in this study, we correlated the age data in the database with their self-reported age, and it was pretty much a one-to-one match. So we weren't concerned about people lying in this study. And then to analyze the results, we again calculated a difference score so that we could test on an individual level if people know comparatively more historical questions or contemporary questions. And these are the results. Again, this is a pretty nice graph that you don't get to see every day. So as you see on the x-axis is age group by decade, and then on the y-axis is the difference score. And you can really see here that groups under the age of 40 knew more of the modern questions better, and adults over the age of 50 knew more of the historical items better, and people in the middle kind of knew a mix of each type of question. And here are the results presented in a slightly different way. So the measures in this table are going to reflect the ability of the AVI to categorize people as being younger or older. Sensitivity is the ability to correctly identify participants as older. Specificity is the ability to identify them as younger. Accuracy means classifying both younger participants as younger and older adults as older. And then positive predicted value is the ratio of participants who were correctly classified as being older compared to all of the participants who were classified as older. And pretty much no matter what measure we're looking at, the AVI seems to be doing a really good job at telling who is, how old people are and whether they're older or younger adults. Okay. In study 2, we wanted to look at our instrument's ability to detect participants who we knew were lying about their age. So these are what we're calling imposters. So what we did was we collected the data on MTurk and opened the study to people who we knew based on previous reports were either 30 or younger. So we knew that these were younger adults. But then in the ad for the study, we explicitly said that we're looking for people who are over 50. And since basically we knew that everyone was should be under 30, anyone who entered the study would be lying about their age. And then again, everyone took the 1999 AVI. And here what we see is like very different from the previous study. Here, everyone pretty much got all the younger questions correct, but more relative to the older questions, which really reflects that these are actually younger participants, even though, as you can see on the x-axis, they're claiming to be 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. So this is a clear reflection of them just lying about their age, but then not knowing the cultural questions from older decades. I'm going to go through study 3 pretty quickly. Basically, what we wanted to do was explore the cultural validity of the measure, because obviously pop culture, there might be different cultures who know more or less. So we looked at African Americans, people who had lower levels of education, and recent immigrants. And we got pretty much the same as study 1. The results are a little bit less stark differences, but overall, you can still see that the measure is doing a really good job differentiating. And you can see the same in the table. It's going a little bit lower than 90s. You got some of the mid 70s and 80s, but still much better than chance or not having a measure at all. So I'm going to briefly talk about some applications and limitations. So first of all, it's not really that well suited for pinpointing an individual's age, because obviously any one person can know more or less about particular questions. But overall, it does indicate, it's one indicator among many. And so like with any data quality check, you don't want to just rely on one. And so this should be, if you're trying to target older adults and you run this, you use these questions and people are only getting the younger questions right, this might be something that raises a red flag and you want to look into the data a little bit more deeply. And then also you can look at this at the group level. So if you think that you were collecting a group of older adults, but then everyone is getting the younger questions right more than the older questions, then maybe there's something wrong with your sample and you want to look again, and maybe also reevaluate the platform where you're getting your data. Some quick challenges. One is that the purpose needs to stay concealed from participants. So if they knew that what we were trying to do was test their age, then they probably would have been incentivized to cheat. And so that's something that you have to try to figure out how to make it fit in the context of your study. A second challenge is that people can become overexposed to measures, like a lot of attention checks. Everyone knows exactly what to look for. And so it may be alternating different specific questions or adding in different topics can be a way to sort of combat that. And then finally, we did replicate it in different cultures. Obviously, there's many more cultures, and this wouldn't work in a completely different country. So one challenge is if you are trying to get at people from different cultures and backgrounds, you might need to adjust the scale somewhat. Some quick future directions is obviously adding in different categories of knowledge, so it doesn't have to just be about popular culture or songs or TV shows. Also, this is not limited to just age. So, there's a lot of target groups that people are interested in, and they have specific knowledge, specialized knowledge that that they would know that other people don't. And so coming up with these kinds of questions can be a way to make sure that you are targeting who you think you are. And then another method could be doing cross-validation. So not just the knowledge questions, but also other, could cross-validate with other demographics or other types of questions. And there's a lot of more ideas out there. I'd be happy to hear more if you have any.
So I'm going to talk about offering personalized feedback as a participation incentive. I want to acknowledge my student collaborators, former master's student Justin Haas, who collected some of these data as part of his master's thesis, some of the data I'm going to discuss, and Adriana Colom Cruz, a former doctoral student who also helped to collect some of these data. People tend to be interested in learning about themselves. This is evident in the tendency to keep diaries, the idea of the quantified self movement. Some of you might continuously track things about your physiology or your sleep, your steps using a Fitbit device or something like an Apple Watch. And researchers have used this interest in feedback and self-insight and learning about yourself as a very effective recruitment tool. A couple notable examples: the Project Implicit website, founded by Tony Greenwald, Mazrin Banaji, and Brian Nozick in 1998, offers feedback on implicit bias using different versions of the implicit association test, or IAT, including the race IAT, among many others. And according to the website, they've collected more than 25 million IATs, contributing to more than 150 peer-reviewed publications. Martin Seligman in 2002 created a website called Authentic Happiness after publishing a book with the same name, where participants can answer questions and get feedback about things related to their well-being, their life satisfaction, positive emotions, meaning in life, and track how those things change over time, and also get feedback on things like character strengths. Again, they've had millions of users register for this site, contributing to many different publications. Jeff Potter created a website in 1997 called outofservice.com, offering feedback about personality, including measures based on the Big Five model of personality. And he's obtained over 15 million responses, contributing to many different publications. There are many examples of this. The last one I'll mention quickly is the SAPA website by Will Revell and David Condon, created in the 2000s, that also offers personality feedback using a slightly different approach that they call the synthetic aperture personality assessment approach, where participants just answer a few items randomly selected from a larger subset of items. And again, this approach allows them to offer individualized feedback, and they've collected data from more than 1 million individuals on this site. So clearly these examples illustrate that individualized feedback can be used effectively to recruit participants into research studies. Maybe some of you have taken some pop psychology quizzes to find out what Disney princess you are, or what Harry Potter house you belong to, Hogwarts house, excuse me. But surprisingly, we know very little. There's very little published research on the nature of offering individualized feedback in terms of characteristics that predict people's interest in individualized feedback about personality, for instance, but also the implications of individualized feedback for things like careless responding. Some research suggests, the little research that's out there suggests some benefits. So again, the examples I just discussed show that individualized feedback can be used as a very effective primary recruitment incentive. In some cases, researchers also allow people to share their personality feedback through social media, so that could result in snowball sampling. One paper, which is very interesting, recruited about 3,000 undergraduate students and gave them the option. They could either choose to receive individualized personality feedback, or they could choose to be entered into a lottery to potentially win one of 30 Amazon gift cards worth 10 euros. About half of the student participants chose the feedback, and that was associated with about 50% lower odds of dropping out of the study. So there's some evidence that there might be benefits in terms of reducing dropout rate. There's some other possibilities. This is speculative, and this was the focus of one of my former master's students' thesis projects, Justin Haas. It's possible that if participants are signing up for study in order to get individualized feedback about their personality, that might promote more autonomous motivation. If you're completing a study in order to collect feedback rather than just to get the financial incentive or just to meet some course requirement for an undergraduate psychology course, you might be motivated to put more time and attention into your answers. So potentially, this could also promote more attentive responding and improve data quality. That's what we predicted. The results, as they're not necessarily robustly consistent with this, but this is a case where some of our non-significant results, I think, actually turned out to be more interesting than we expected. Maybe that's another nod to Tukey and exploratory data analysis, although we did have some confirmatory hypotheses here. So if I'm signing up for a study in order to get individualized feedback about my personality, that feedback is only going to be useful if I take the time to read and provide an honest, attentive response to these questions. Over here, by the way, I have an example of feedback by truncated the text, but this is feedback that we provided in one study on openness to experience. There's some challenges. So for one thing, in order to show where someone falls in a distribution, if your score is average or high, you need appropriate test norms, and you need to figure out how to interpret those results. So you may have completed the "What Disney princess are you?" pop psychology quiz, but if you're collecting data in a way that emphasizes a university affiliation, or as a research study, I think there's an ethical imperative to ensure that feedback is based on science and doesn't extend beyond our knowledge about something or about beyond your own expertise. So it can be challenging to make sure that you have appropriate norms. If you have data from undergraduate students, that may not apply to an older sample of participants recruited from a crowdsourcing site. There are also some logistical issues involving being able to program the feedback or sharing feedback. And it does take a little more time if participants are viewing feedback. So you might set it up as something that's optional, but still you might, there are questions about, should you pay participants for that additional time that they're spending on your study? So I'm going to show you data from a few studies. The first was a study where we recruited 264 participants from various sites, online sites where you can recruit participants, sharing links on social media, undergraduate participant pool. And we emphasize individualized feedback about personality and relationships as a recruitment incentive in our advertisements, consent form, and so on. The study took about 26 minutes to complete. We measured personality. At the end of the study, participants knew about personality. We wanted to use that as a primary recruitment incentive. We asked them at the end if they wanted to see the survey feedback, so the personalized feedback, yes or no. In which case, if they said yes, we showed them a page summarizing the results with interpretations. We also had a few measures of careless responding. We had more than I'm going to show you now, but I'm just going to focus on a composite of 3, the infrequency subscale from the ARS 18 that I published with Ron Rogie back in 2014. This includes items like, I like going to the DMV, for instance. For directed, what we call directed questions for this item, please select not at all. And we also measured how many seconds per question participants spent on average over the sort of main pages of the survey, not counting the consent form or consent paragraph, not counting the page with feedback. Overall, 71% of participants chose to view the feedback. Those viewing feedback tended to be significantly lower in careless responding. So I have here with the blue bars, the y-axis is this continuous composite measure of careless responding. These are participants who chose to view feedback. These are participants who did not choose to view feedback. And you can see a pretty notable difference. Now, one possibility is participants who are highly careless, maybe they just randomly answer the question about whether they want to see feedback. But of those who we would flag as excessively careless, a majority of them chose not to view the feedback. So this is a pretty substantial difference. When we look at the way we usually use these measures of careless responding is we try to find some cut score to identify someone as so careless that we would screen them out of our results. So when we look at these individual indices and then the combination, among those using feedback, about 6% would be flagged as excessively careless using these cut scores, which I'll sort of gloss over the details here. Among those who did not choose to view feedback, 34% of them were identified as excessively careless on at least one of these indices. This is just about the largest difference that I think I've ever identified. There were also some personality differences. Those who chose to view feedback tended to be higher in honesty, humility, conscientiousness, and openness to experience. Now, some of these things overlap with careless responding. So when we exclude 37 highly careless responders, most of these things drop to non-significance, with the exception of openness to experience. I think this makes some sense. People who are higher on openness to experience tend to be interested in learning new things. And so they may be more motivated to learn about themselves through personality feedback. There's an issue here, though. Personality predicts careless responding. And so this doesn't tell us that offering feedback as a recruitment incentive causes less careless responding. So we did 2 experimental studies. I'm going to kind of merge the results here. We did 2 internet-based experiments, one with 387 participants from Amazon Mechanical Turk, and we wanted some careless responders, so we didn't use some of the screening tools. We didn't use the CloudResearch sort of verified participants, for instance. And we also recruited in a separate study 458 participants from an undergraduate participant pool. Some of the measures were similar. Participants didn't have to be in a relationship in this study, but we did not say anything about individualized feedback in the advertisement or the consent form. It was only after participants signed up for the study and read the consent page and agreed to participate where they went to a page where they were randomly assigned either to learn about the availability of feedback or not. So in the feedback condition, we told them we'll provide you with an opportunity to view feedback about your personality. The personality feedback will be most accurate if you take your time and provide an honest answer to each question. In the control condition, we had some similar wording. There are generally no right or wrong answers. Please take your time. But we didn't mention the availability of feedback. At the end of the survey, we still offered feedback to everyone. The feedback conditions did not significantly differ in autonomous motivation. If we look at one item that is more relevant, we did find a small effect that participants were more likely to say they were participating to learn about themselves in the condition where we emphasized feedback. The proportion actually viewing feedback didn't differ significantly, and it was pretty similar across samples, across conditions, around 70%, give or take, around across these different studies and samples and so on, actually chose to view the feedback. The feedback conditions did not significantly differ in careless responding. And in the MTurk sample, this is a Cohen's d of 0.0002. This is just about close to verifying the null hypothesis as I think I've seen. Here are proportions across the conditions for different if we look at cutoffs for people who I would consider excessively careless, we did not identify, not just non-significant, really, there were no notable differences. I'm comfortable saying that our hypothesis was falsified here. We did not find that emphasizing feedback notably improved data quality. However, when we look at who actually chose to view feedback, regardless of condition, we found results very comparable to the other study. People who chose to view feedback, regardless of whether they were aware of it at the beginning of the study or not, tended to be significantly lower in careless responding. This was true across the MTurk sample, across the undergraduate sample, across various indices of careless responding. And these are pretty substantial effects. So the bottom line is a majority of participants choose to view feedback, express interest in feedback, even when they're receiving other tangible participation incentives like fulfilling a course requirement, receiving a financial incentive. People who choose to view feedback tend to provide more attentive responses, tend to differ in some personality characteristics. But I don't think that this is causal. I don't think that emphasizing the availability of feedback causes these changes in motivation and improved data quality. I think really it's that a certain type of person is interested in feedback. That type of person is also likely to provide better quality data. So there could still be some benefits to providing feedback, but mostly because it would attract a certain type of participant.